Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name is Paras Fatnani. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at Seed Global Education. We see a lot of people are slowly jumping in. We'll wait for a few minutes. But today's session is really exciting because we've got Dr. Kyle Welch, who will talk to us about how innovation impacts growth of business and how it can keep you ahead of the curve when you're thinking strategically to grow. But before we go to much of that, I'm super excited. Today's session is run in partnership with the George Washington University's School of Business. We'll also learn about different programs that they offer through the course of this afternoon. For all of you that are joining in, welcome again. While we wait for some others to join, if you can use the chat functionality at the bottom of your screen to tell us which city are you joining in from today. We know there's folks from multiple parts of India and other countries joining as well. So if you use the chat functionality at the bottom, welcome Rishabh, who's from Bombay. There's folks from Punjab, Delhi. Lovely to have everybody here. Mumbai so far dominating. Got someone from Hubli. Wonderful to see you all here. Folks from Hyderabad as well. Lovely to have you join us today. Today's session is going to be super exciting. We're going to learn things that help businesses stay ahead of the curve using innovation. Lovely to see folks here from Liberia as well. Folks joining in from Ghana, Accra. Lovely to have you all here. Thanks for joining in. We've got Dr. Kyle coming in from Austin, Texas as well. So going across the US too. So lovely to see so many folks here, folks from Warangal, Kochi, Kolkata. Wonderful. So we're going to start off in just a minute. But before we start off, today's session will also help you decide what your graduate study area should be in the future. So learn more about GW. It's a great opportunity for you to understand the kind of programs as well as offerings that the George Washington University School of Business has. Couple of things before we get started. If you do have any questions that come to your mind once the session is, once the masterclass starts, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Once the two presentations are done, we'll try and take as many questions as possible. So don't worry, keep posting your questions. We will come back to them. If any of the speakers are talking and requesting you to respond, like what we've done so far, please use the chat functionality to come back with any responses. Great to see folks here, even from Kumasi in Ghana, folks from Punjab in India. In just under a minute, we'll get started. Many a times you wonder how businesses grow and where from small ideas where you can find unique positioning to scaling up to multiple business areas and growing to large corporations. So we learn a lot more about how innovation can impact growth and in any way contribute to the ideas around that. We're just under a minute before we start. So once again, for folks that are joining in just now, welcome once again. My name is Paras Fatnani. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at Seed Global Education. Today's session is run in partnership with the George Washington University's School of Business. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kyle in just a few seconds. If anyone has questions, please post them through the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take them there. A little bit about Dr. Kyle before I hand it over to him to speak. He's the Associate Professor of Accountancy at the George Washington University's School of Business. Before becoming a professor at GW, he worked in the investment team at the Stanford Management Company, which is the Stanford University's endowment. While he was there, he developed asset allocation and portfolio strategies. He's also evaluated public equity and private equity, venture capital, and hedge fund investment opportunities for several years. Prior to working at Stanford, he was at Stanford and Poor's in the corporate valuation and consulting group. So pleasure to have you here, Kyle, and I'll hand over to you now to talk to us about today's session.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for coming and and joining us today. Let me see if I can get the presentation mode on. Great. I'm going to be talking about something that's counterintuitive, and as you go out and you actually are looking to better yourself and learn things, I've found some of the best information that you can get is the information that is counter to what you would naturally think, right? And that kind of information is critical to have, because if you go about life and you just discover things that anybody would have discovered, that's pretty easy. But when you find things that are not intuitive but true, it's super valuable. And so today we're going to be talking about something related to accounting that is very counterintuitive. It's not talked about a lot, but it is true. And we're going to get to what is the causal mechanism in business, and in particular, the causal mechanism of what causes a large corporation to go bankrupt, to go under because of a new competitor. What causes the Sears or the large global competitors that used to exist in the 80s no longer be the large global competitors and instead be unseated by upstarts? And we're going to talk about why accounting, and particularly a lack of understanding of accounting, is actually the core causal mechanism in this. And I know a lot of you guys understand technology, and maybe some of you are computer science people and are like, no, it's all tech. It's the technology. Technology is awesome. I'm not saying technology is not awesome, but what causes businesses to make the bad decisions is rooted in the accounting. And we're going to talk about how they do it. All right, so we already talked about me. We can go through this. Uh, 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 the agenda is I'm going to start off by talking about why God is not an accountant. It will lay the groundwork in detail of what we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to talk about the sugar-coated lies of accounting. All right. These are the sugar-coated lies. These are the donuts, the things that just add calories and diabetes to you, right? The things that we don't want to have, right? We're going to talk about disruption of profit margin, disruption and efficiency ratios, and jobs to be done in marketing research. We'll go through these things, and I don't know if we'll get into the other items, but we'll see how far we get today. All right, so let me just start off by saying I know God is not an accountant. I know this. And it might seem weird, like why am I going to I thought this was a thing about accounting and business. What's God got to do with it? I'm telling you, God's not an accountant. Now, I don't know if it's a he, she, or it, or whatever, but I know God is not an accountant. And maybe I'm going to try asking a question in the Zoom and saying, okay, well, why do you guys think God's not an accountant? I know God's not an accountant. Some of you might think God is an accountant. Well, some of the answers that usually come up are because it's God. Like, why would he need an accountant? Right? Like, he knows everything, or she knows everything, or it knows everything. Right. And so as a result, like, why on earth does God need to know stuff? It turns out, um, if you had all the accounting, let's say for Amazon, like let's say we had all the receipts and all the emails that everybody got about what they purchased on Amazon, and it was in a flash drive, and you had that flash drive, and you were able to pull up all the screens on your computer. The problem is that us as humans have no way of understanding it. We have no way of understanding it unless we condense it, unless we drop it down. And so the thing is that we have all this data about business, right? We have all this data. We have operations data, customer data, accounting data, compliance data, economics data, market data. And we distill all those things down into marketing reports and accounting reports and operating reports, and then we do an analysis. But the problem is, and this is the problem that's missed when people look at these things, they don't realize there's information that gets lost. And so there's a saying that they say here in the US. They say the devil's in the details, and the saying's wrong. The original saying is God is in the details, because the reason why is God doesn't need to summarize anything. And so my class, accounting at GW, is about the summary of information. And so if it has nothing to do with God, it's exactly what you think. It's probably the language of Satan. Welcome to hell. That's what accounting is. It is hard because they distill the information down, and you got to figure out the details and what's going on. So today we'll get an aspect of what accounting gets wrong with the pedestrian interpretation. And when I say pedestrian, I mean pretty much the average run of the mill interpretation of how things should be done. And so you'll have, at least at this session, you'll walk away hopefully having better knowledge. And this comes from my time when I studied at George Washington. I'm sorry, when I studied getting my doctorate. Clayton Christensen was one of my advisors, and he says he's often misunderstood. He's a well-known guy in academia, business, but accountants, not techies, cause disruption, and we'll go through why. There's a couple of phrases that you will hear over the course of your career, and they're phrases that sound really good, and they're connected to accounting, but they sound so good, they almost sound right, but they're wrong. They're not they're saying something, but they're not translating into what really is being said. So let's go through a couple of those phrases. These are, I call them the siren songs. All right. Unlock value trapped in the business. All right. That's something that gets said. We need to do what we do best, or we need to focus on what we do best. Let's focus on our core competencies. These are phrases you might have even heard. This is something that you might have actually been in meetings and heard people say, but these are siren songs that sound right, but really will lead you down a bad path. And hopefully you'll see how there'll be nails on a chalkboard by the end of the day. All right, so the groundwork, we're going to say, you don't have to know the whole formula, but we're going to talk about the DuPont formula. It was started by the DuPont organization when DuPont actually owned, automobiles, they owned chemicals, they owned a bunch of different business, and they wanted to analyze these different businesses. And they wanted to say, okay, what's going on in these different businesses, and how can we use accounting information to see how efficient they're being? And there was a couple of different ways they had to measure efficiency. The guy that came up with the equation for it, the DuPont formula, Donaldson Brown, he is actually a Virginia resident. That's where I currently live. But what he did is he created this DuPont formula, and it's taught everywhere. It's taught at every school across the nation. What's not taught is what's wrong with it, and how it can lead to bad decisions. It relies on accounting data entirely. And so this is the equation right here. Return on equity, which is what we want. We all want to be rich, right? We want return on equity. We want our growth in the business. We want more, right? So a return on equity is equal to profit margin times asset turnover times leverage. All right. And the way it's calculated is below that equation, right below it, you'll see it's net income over average equity equals net income over revenue times revenue over assets times average assets over equity. That corresponds to the labels that are above it. And so we're going to start off by talking about profit margin. Okay. Profit margin is net income divided by revenue. That's what it is here. Now, what do I mean by that? Revenue is all the money you get from customers. Then you have all your expenses or losses that happen in the period. And net income is at the bottom. It's what you have left over after paying everybody, about the cost of inventory, about all that. So the ratio of net income to revenue is one that you want high. You want to make more money on every dollar that comes in. If you want to improve this metric, there's a couple ways to go about doing it. The one that you should do, and the one you're hired to do as a manager, is your job is to make the place more efficient, to find ways to cut costs, to find ways to offer things at a lower cost to customers at a similar value, so that you could actually increase your net income and actually walk away with more profit. That's what you're hired to do as a manager. But there's another way to mess with this ratio. And one of the ways to mess with this ratio is imagine you have an operating segment and you have a lot of different products. You have let's just say you think about convenience stores, all right? And for us, 7-Eleven or Wawa is my local convenience store. They sell it's a diabetes house where you get your sugar drinks, you get your sugar donuts, and then you get your sugar candy bars. And in my case, the zero sugar monster drinks that I'm trying to kick, right? And so let's say they did analysis at the local convenience store, and they said, you know what, we make a lot more money on our drinks and not as much money on our candy bars. You know what, if we want our profit margin to go up, we could just not sell candy bars. And that's true. If they just sold soda drinks and did not sell candy bars, their profit margin would be higher because it's sugar water and it's like one of the biggest margin items in the store. The problem with that is that people still want to buy the cookies or the donuts or the other stuff, the candy bars. And so what you can end up doing in your business is, if you focus on this in the wrong way, you can actually start offloading businesses that are profitable, and also businesses that are segments that are core to your business, that if you once you get rid of them, you leave yourself vulnerable to somebody coming in and eating your lunch. And the intuition here, in the example I give, it's pretty obvious. We got to sell candy bars too, because it's the diabetes house, right? But if you're gonna, the intuition with this is not clear. It's not a clear intuition from this, and it gets more fuzzy as you look at other segments. So let me give you an example of how this is taught. Some of you might be familiar with the CFA program. This is a slide from the CFA program, and it's a great slide, and it's true, but it doesn't give all the information. And this is the problem of how things get taught and things are thought about in accounting. So this is segment analysis from the CFA Institute on one of their slide decks from 2013. And they're looking at Nestle. You guys probably know Nestle. It's an international company that sells chocolate and water and a bunch of different things, pharmaceuticals. Well, they do a segment analysis, and they look at this 2007 earnings before interest and taxes. And they have a ratio here, and earnings before interest and taxes, and the ratio is how profitable there is. Basically, something's close to net income over revenue. And they look and they say, oh my gosh, pharma is at 33%. And then they have these other segments. Nestle Nutrition is at 17%. And then they have segmented by, area. And then at the bottom, they have Nestle Waters. That is an 8.18%. All right. Well, looking at those, which one do they make more money from? They make more money from every dollar of pharma. And the analysis at the bottom, in the segment analysis, says this, and this is the siren song. If the company were to continue to allocate capital towards lowest margin business segment, the overall corporate returns might be negatively impacted. True. This is true. Absolutely true. But it doesn't mean it's a good idea to not do that. It doesn't. And so I'll go through a historical example that will give some context for you. And then I'm going to talk about how this has happened over and over and over in industry after industry, and has caused incumbents that were much larger, had much bigger coffers, to essentially hand over their business to their smaller, less profitable, but eager competitors. So back in the early 1960s, most steel was manufactured, and I'm going way back because I want to give a context that's different from today. We'll bring it to some earlier things today, but you go way back and you see, oh, that's how it worked, and then you can talk about some other ones. So if you look at the top left corner, this little picture, I don't know if you can see, it's a black and white picture. It's what's called an integrated steel mill. These are all ghost towns across the United States right now, but back in the day, these are the places that were hot. They were just like, they were huge facilities that actually melted iron ore to make steel. And they made not just one kind of steel, they made all sorts of steel. They made rebar, they made angle irons, they made I-beams to actually as support. And then at the high end, they made sheet steel, which was used for other products. And so they made all these different products. But the problem was they had these huge mills that cost, in today's dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to actually put up and to actually get running. And then when you put regulatory stuff on it, you're probably pushing close to $1 billion on those, but definitely in the hundreds of millions. Huge infrastructure costs. Well, the big steel manufacturer, Bethlehem and U.S. Steel at the time, they dominated the market. They were everywhere. There was this new technology. All right. Now, a lot of times we think about technology and we think, oh, the technology that we want is always new, sexy, awesome, works great. No. The key to disruption is technology that is pretty crummy. It's actually not good technology. It's like mediocre. And that's what happened here. What happened here is the electric arc furnace was invented. And right around 1960s, 1970s, the electric arc furnace, what it did was it brought metal into a room and electrocuted it and melted it down to make steel. That's what it did. in a nutshell. And if you'll notice right down at the right corner, that's a picture of an electric arc furnace. The electric arc furnace compared to the integrated steel mill was much cheaper to buy and took a much lower footprint than the integrated steel mills. But there was a problem. The technology associated with the electric arc furnace was crap. It was crummy. It was horrible. It was so bad. The only thing that the electric arc furnace could make is rebar. And what rebar is, if you ever go by and they put rebar inside of concrete to give it some structure, it's usually a little tube of steel that goes inside of concrete slabs to give it structure so concrete doesn't fall away. Well, all they could do was produce rebar, but the beauty of what they could do is they could produce rebar at a lower cost. And so while they could only do rebar, they were doing rebar at a margin that was slightly better than the integrated steel mills. The integrated steel mills were in all of their segments. They were in rebar, angle iron rod, structural steel, and sheet steel. And rebar started to have some competition. And they started having competition from these guys that had electric arc furnaces. Nucor Steel was one of the main ones, and they weren't a big company. They were very small, easy to pivot to. But what the management did is they came into a room and they looked and they said, our rebar is our crappiest, it's our crummiest product offering, in the sense that our customers are always complaining about cost. It's super competitive, and it's the lowest quality thing that we make. And so they said, you know what, let's focus on our core competencies. Let's do what we do best. And what they decided to do was to exit the rebar market and focus on all the other segments. And they said, you know what, we're just not going to make rebar anymore. We're just going to focus on these other segments because, the electric arc furnace, they can't do it. It's a crummy technology. We have the advanced technology. We're going to focus on the higher end. Well, they ceded that market to the electric arc furnace. Any of you know about market competitions, all of a sudden, if you had a mini mill at the time, your profit margin went down to the other mini mills. So it wasn't as profitable, but you were still making profit selling rebar. You couldn't have really predicted what would happen next about how it would happen, but you do know this. Everyone with an electric arc furnace was making money on rebar and was really hungry to figure out solutions to get into the other segments. They really wanted to do that. There was huge incentives to do that. And so over a course of time, they improved the technology. They improved the type of steel that they could make. So not only could they make rebar, all of a sudden they entered another segment, angle iron and I-beams, these type of things that are structures in buildings. And they start making them, and they're making them at a lower cost than the integrated steel mills. And the integrated steel mills met again, and they said, the crummy technology's gotten a little bit better, but they're never going to be doing sheet steel, structural steel. And they said, hey, we need to focus on our core competencies, do what we do best, focus on high-end steel. We make high-end. We service the high-end customer. Well, they ceded that market to everyone else. And the problem with this is that if you go fast forward to today, this happened over every segment of steel, to the point now today where right now, of all the integrated steel mills, U.S. Steel is the only one that still exists. All of them went bankrupt. Most of their factories are ghost towns. And you know who the largest producer of steel is, at least in the United States? It's Nucor. It's the guys that had the electric arc furnace, and they make all sorts of steel from rebar to sheet steel. And guess what? U.S. Steel is the only thing they make. They only make high-end steel products. They're not in any other segment. And they're there because instead of turning around and fighting their competitors like they should have, they retreated. They were lazy. They looked at the accounting and said, oh, the accounting, it tastes so much better up there. We need to go up there. And so they retreated there. So I'm going to look and see if there's any questions here. I'm a mathematics student moving to the final year now. I will be educated. Okay. All right. I thought that was a question about something, but I didn't see a question. All right. So this happened in the steel industry. This is facts. This is not Kyle's opinion. This has happened. Bethlehem Steel, which was a juggernaut in the 60s, poof in the 80s, gone. And Nucor is the juggernaut now, and it's all because not because of the tech. It's because the guys that were incumbents looked at the accounting and say, I need to retreat. The accounting, their interpretation of it was, I need to retreat. And this is a big problem, is that people look at the accounting and don't understand what their job is as a manager. Your manager is to fight, not retreat. Your job as a manager is to not let anybody eat your lunch, all right, in your business. All right. So this is what we call a flee or fight response to evaluating investments and on margin. And when you do this, if you do this, you'll end up doing the analysis like they say here, where, oh, if you allocate to Nestle Water. Now, Nestle Water isn't as connected to pharma, but you can see how this analysis applied in an inappropriate way could totally cause problems for your business. And so you wouldn't be able, like I said, you wouldn't be able to predict how the technology developed, but you would be able to predict that the crummy technology and everybody around it would have a reason to innovate around it so they could go up and essentially eat the lunch of their competitors. And so let me see how we're doing with time. Let's go through some examples. So here's some attributes usually of what goes on. It usually offers a lower performance. The situation with the upstart, so the new startup or the smaller company offers a lower performance, provides new performance attributes, possibly not valued by current customers, and then performance improves till it displaces the competitor. So it's not what you think. It's not the fancy smancy technology. It's usually something lower quality. And so let's go through some examples of this. So like US Steel and Nucor with the mini mills. Vacuum tubes versus transistor radios. Vacuum tubes used to be what radios were based off. Then they went to transistors. Transistor radios, they serviced a market like nobody had. The people that had transistor radios were teenagers that wanted to listen to the radio at the beach. And you're like, what's a transistor radio? That's like from 50 years ago. But that's how the technology developed. Cathode ray tubes versus liquid crystal displays. So LCD displays started off as crummy clocks and eventually taken over aspects of TVs. You look at mainframes versus personal computers, and how mainframes, what they had is those punch cards, and then personal computers were servicing customers in homes, and eventually ends up taking up dominant shares of the market. And then you look at personal computers and phones. If you missed the phone transition from actually having a computer and desktop to where a lot of business is done today on a phone, you missed it. And here's the thing, the phone, this is actually something that my advisor got wrong when he predicted it. And it's one of the few things he got wrong. He got wrong, but he didn't get, his theory wasn't wrong. So when asked about the iPhone, my advisor, Clayton Christensen, said, oh, it's a high-end phone. And according to theory, it was servicing the high-end customers. The problem is that he didn't know really what it is. The iPhone wasn't a high-end phone. It was a crummy computer. That's really what it was. And you think about your phone and what you use it for. Calling people is like a fraction of it. You use it for basically to check email, to check notes, to check social media, to do all the things you would possibly do on a computer. And when it first came out, it was good enough for mobile aspects of that. And now it's so good that sometimes I'm sitting on my desktop and I'll go and look on my phone because it'll be quicker or I feel better with it. And so the phone has become a crummy computer. It's amazing. It's displaced the personal computer from that. You think about Netflix. Netflix started by mailing scratched DVDs basically to people that were willing to wait, where Blockbuster, which was a juggernaut, could have essentially said, hey, guess what, Netflix, we're going to also do a mail DVD business. They didn't. Instead, what Blockbuster focused on, they had a meeting about Netflix. They could have bought Netflix for a few $1 million, but they said, you know what? Netflix services the low-end customers. These are customers that want cheap movies. We service the high-end, people that want a movie now. And that's why we have the brick and mortar locations. And so when people need to go rent a movie, they're going to come to our Blockbuster. Let's focus on selling $20 licorice, is what basically they said. It's ridiculous. You think about Southwest Airlines in the United States. I apologize. I know there's a lot of international people, but the low-cost carrier model for airlines, the way it started is they said, let's compete with cars and trains. and they took the lowest flights. In that case, they didn't even have new technology. Southwest just basically looked at it and said, let's service the customers that the big airlines don't want to serve. Let's do the ones that are doing these puddle jumps. And then you think about Uber versus Black Car. Uber is so much cheaper from a cost basis to operate, cars, and for the operator too, than say a taxi cab and having Medallion or a Black Car service. And then Uber is, we have these mobile scooters. Amazon's a perfect example. Amazon's decided to target customers with books, book retail. Retail books is the worst business on the planet for retail because you have to have every book on the planet. You know how many SKUs that is? I mean, you go to a grocery store and they have milk or they have water, they have, chicken, you pick up what you need. At a bookstore, they have to have the book you want to read. So it's incredibly it's not very intuitive. But what's happened in each of these examples is the incumbent, which was more powerful and had more resources, allowed somebody to come into their home, essentially their market, and just take over. And so Jeff Bezos is keenly aware of this. He has a couple phrases here that I like, is that there are two kinds of companies: those that work to try to charge more, and those that work to charge less. We will be the second. And the other one is, your margin is my opportunity. And that's the right way to go at this. And so the siren song is, let's do what we do best and let's focus on our core competencies. But let's translate those. If we translated those, the true translation to what's going on is, we don't know how to effectively compete in this market. Our competitors are besting us at every turn. We need to retreat to less competitive markets. That's truly what's being said. And that's what the accounting is saying, but people are phrasing it in the wrong way and doing the analysis in the wrong way. And they end up forking over their entire market over to their competitors. Let's see. So other examples of this, it's funny. And here's the aspect. When it comes to technology in particular, people think, again, flashy technology is the thing, but it's not. The back about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Andy Grove, who ran Intel, he basically wanted to know what to do. And so he did the analysis, not listening to the accountants, but actually saying, okay, we need to actually make a crummy Intel chip so that we can actually compete with ourselves. And they created the Celeron chip, which is basically was a crummy chip. The problem is they didn't go crummy enough. And what's happened since is they've been trying to play catch up, because as crummy as the Celeron chip was compared to the Intel Pentium processor, there were crummier chips put in VCRs and in phones. And it turns out today, some of the largest chip makers in the world were on those crummier products. And it's funny, they just didn't focus on a crummy enough technology on the customers that nobody wanted to serve. And that's really the key here, is you got to really, like, if you want to protect your business, the customers that you don't want to serve, those are the ones that your competitors can gobble up the quickest and create something for you to compete with. Like MediaTek is like a huge it's a huge chip maker right now. And this could have been a market that Intel dominated, but they just gave it away because they didn't go crummy enough and they didn't do the analysis well enough. All right. So next, we're going to talk about asset turnover. So this is the next ratio here. I didn't see any questions on anything. Oh, there might be some questions here. What numbers look like for all this competition for the steel company? What do the numbers look like for all this competition for the steel company? The numbers, if we go back to that, it was about 7% margins for the rebar and up to 25 to 30% margins. These change over time, obviously, but the higher margin businesses are the ones that actually, they have the percentage ratio that is, they just have a higher percentage in the ratio. How do you foresee the role of innovation metrics evolving in the coming years? All right. Really, what it is knowing what accounting is and knowing how accounting can give you the absolute wrong answers. All right, so let's talk about asset turnover. This is a good one to touch on. When we look at asset turnover, it takes the revenue, so the total amount of money you get from customers, and you divide it by the assets, which is great because it tells you, okay, what are the resources needed? What are the resources needed to actually make a dollar? And wouldn't it be great if you didn't need as many resources? Like if you have 5 buildings making things and you can go down to 2, that sounds great and make the same amount. And if you can figure out ways to be more efficient, even fewer people, right? Although that wouldn't go into your average assets, but it's in the same nature, and that's the same principle. What we want to do is figure out how assets can be eliminated and still increase or maintain the same level of productivity. The problem is you have the same distraction with the denominator on this. If you have something that is a larger asset that makes a smaller revenue, it could be very tempting to actually sell off that segment, and then all of a sudden your revenue over your assets is higher. Alternatively, you might look at it and you might say, okay, we have a lot of this stuff in house. Why don't we outsource? Why don't we offshore? Why don't we do this in a place where there's people that are making lower income that we can hire and not have it inside of our business? And so let's offshore it and let's outsource it. Well, that does do some things to the accounting equation, but I'm going to tell you a story, and Michael Dell disagrees with this story as far as it goes down. But if you actually look at the events happen in this way. And the story's about Dell and a company that came on, started showing up in the late 90s, ASUSTech. Now, ASUSTech back in the day, they started off making simple circuit boards. They made little circuit chip boards. They didn't do any of the fancy stuff that they're doing now. And what they did is they went to Dell, and they said, do you know what? We can make these motherboards cheaper. We're not in the United States. We can actually make the boards cheaper, and we can actually, get everything put together. And if you do this, you guys need to focus on your core competency. You need to work on, designing the computer and putting it together, and logistics and the brand and getting people to buy your computer. Those are the things that you're really good at. These circuit boards, and they're very similar to our motherboard. The motherboard, we can just make your motherboards and we can make them cheaper. And so Dell decided, yeah, let's outsource to ASUSTech motherboards. Well, ASUSTech started making motherboards and they started getting really good at it. And they went to Dell and they said, hey, you know what? We're making the motherboard. That's kind of like the heart of the computer in the sense of where everything ends up. Maybe we should start assembling the computer, right? And if we assemble the computer, because we have the motherboard here, and that's one of the bigger parts, if we assemble the computer, you guys can focus on product design and designing the best computers in the brand. And so they did it. And then ASUSTech didn't really take over the logistics. FedEx did. And, it was really funny. FedEx, has a statement about this. It's the partnership with Dell. And they talked about how it was just it's a friendly partnership. And managers seem to forget capitalism is about putting other people out of business. That's at its core. And it's funny because Dell looked at this and they had this, oh yeah, we're outsourcing our supply chain logistics. So they outsourced their supply chain logistics. And then all of a sudden, product design, ASUSTech was essentially looking at it and said, you know what, we're putting these things together. We know how these chips work. We know the errors that happen in the assembly. I think we could be better at designing this stuff. And all of a sudden they took over design. And then you got to a point where Dell was selling basically a sticker on the side of a computer. And ASUSTech had everything. They handed their entire business over to ASUSTech. And so I have about 5 minutes left. I want to this is the phrase to use. Accounting can be useful, but the right way to measure things is in wheelbarrows of cash. That's the right way to measure things. The wrong way to measure things is to out ratio everything. What Dell did is they looked at their accountants, they looked at their Excel spreadsheets, and they ratioed it. I'm an accounting professor, by the way. I'm trashing on the problems of my own profession. They looked at those ratios and it told them all the wrong decisions to do every step of the way. And what they ended up doing was creating a competitor and nearly going bankrupt. And so uh, the this return on assets takes a lot of form. Return on net assets or asset turnover. It's essentially, it takes the form of some sort of income statement number of revenue over average assets or total assets, and you can game it. You can game it, but guess what? If you game it, you end up doing something like what Dell did. There's an example here. I don't. We have a lot of international people here, but Mervyn's did this. Mervyn's was a company on the West Coast. I grew up on the West Coast of the United States, and Mervyn's decided that well, the private equity firm purchased Mervyn's, and they decided that what they were going to do was to sell off all the land that Mervyn's owned. Mervyn's was a retail store, and they owned all the land they were on, and Target owned all the land they were on too, and the two of them made two very different decisions. Mervyn's decided we're going to spin off all of our real estate and lease it back. Well, yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, you can unlock value trapped in the business because you can lease back real estate that you own. But what happens when the market goes down? What happens when times are hard and everything's not like this? I'll tell you what happens. You end up closing stores. And Mervyn's would shut one store and shut another store and shut another store. Meanwhile, Target had an activist investor trying to do the same thing to their business, and they fought against it and they didn't sell off their assets. And yeah, it will unlock value. And yeah, the stock will have a spike, but you're foregoing the future. You're trading the future for the present. Apple was interesting. Samsung, they did this right. They're one of the greatest examples of of doing this right. Samsung had extra capacity in their manufacturing of their phones. They had extra capacity. And so what they did is they went to Apple and they said, hey, we can actually manufacture part of your phone for you. Well, instead of outsourcing it and saying, we don't have enough to do here, let's outsource this segment because it's too costly, they said, let's do it for our competitors. And sure enough, they did it cheaper so that the competitor could have a better price. But what Apple traded, and we know this from lawsuits, is they traded a whole bunch of, excuse me, they traded a whole bunch of design features and aspects of their phones that Samsung totally just had a window into, right? And so instead of outsourcing, Samsung kept it in-house, and it was a huge strategic advantage. So here's the translation to this asset ratio. It says this is the siren song. Unlock value trapped inside the business. And the translation is we don't have many places to grow revenue. So we're going to sell off our assets. And some of them might be core aspects of our business to pay a dividend. We will put our business at risk to look lean. That's essentially what's happening when you do this. And then there's leverage ratios, which also can be gamed by essentially taking on leverage. This was this is a DuPont formula example from the CFA Institute. And if you look at this, of these three, this was done in 2013. And if you look at these three, it looks like the return on equity for Dell is amazing. Like, which of these companies looks awesome on the ROE is Dell. But we see why Dell got into trouble. Dell got into trouble because they made most of their money from this 6.67 average assets over to average equity, essentially their financial leverage and their sales over average assets. Apple instead focused on their profit margin, and that's where majority of their profitability comes from. And so you look at this analysis, and the point is to say this analysis is only one part of the story. To really be a good leader and a good manager, understanding accounting is knowing the full picture and knowing what the information is telling you and the different translations of the strategies people might have looking at it. And let me see. Let me look at. I hear some pops for the questions. What's your analysis on Tesla bid to license its software to incumbents? How will this mixture of hardware and software impact Tesla's margins? So Tesla's an interesting example because Tesla is seen as a new great technology, but they're clearly not as good in some levels. Like you have to charge your car, you got to go to certain locations, and there are two aspects of their business that will fit into this model. And the two aspects of their business, and they know this, is autonomous vehicles and semi trucks. Semi trucks, there's so many truck drivers in the world, so many. I think the analysis I saw was 5% of the world, the U.S. economy at least, is truck drivers. If you can replace them with a better machine, that is going to be super efficient. And if they can move up from making sedans to actually making to making not SUVs, but making semi trucks, those semi trucks. I mean, you think about a semi truck breaking down all the moving components. You know, the thing about Tesla is most of their driving technology is pretty simple. It's a simple magnetic machine, right? So as far as licensing, Tesla's doing a great job because they've opened up the standard of their charging stations. So they're charging now, you know, essentially, what is it? Ford and other auto manufacturers are using Tesla charging stations now, which is great. If they can actually own the software inside of the cars that other people make, I think Tesla would enjoy having that as their business, is essentially working on those aspects of the business. But there's a huge margin to be made in manufacturing electric semi trucks, and especially autonomous semi trucks. So very interesting. And when we talk about what the opportunity is, it's like an order of magnitude greater than like the social media apps. It is huge. What's going to happen in logistics and transportation with this, you know, driverless tech is just very huge. All right. Well, I think that's it for time. I have a bunch of stuff that I usually talk about in class. We talk about milkshakes, jobs to be done, other things, you know, how New York Times just gave away their entire business. Anyway, but I think that's it for me. I'm out of time. And so I'll turn the time back over.
Thank you, Carl. That was super helpful and extremely valuable. You know, listening to you with just the business models and how businesses evolved. The blockbuster Netflix story definitely is one for the archives as well. So thank you for sharing that. There are a few questions coming in. What I want to do is, for folks that are listening in, if you have any questions to what Carl spoke about, or more broadly as well, please post them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. In just about 5 to 7 minutes, we'll start taking some of those questions. But I want to go over to Megan at this point. You know, we've learned so much about how a certain topic is made more articulate when it comes to accounting. Tell us how is it to study at GW, and what benefits the students see as well. If you want to talk us through your presentation, that'll be fun.
Sure. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops, sorry. All right. My name is Megan Vanson. I'm an Associate Director of Graduate Admissions here at the GW School of Business. Been here for coming up on 2 years in December. And so I'm just going to go through a little bit what programs we have, besides, of course, our accountancy program, how you apply, et cetera, more information. So I'm going to start by showing this cool map. This is the map of the Foggy Bottom area in Washington, D.C., where I am located right now. So as you know, GW is located right in the heart of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We were actually founded by a congressional charter, federal congressional charter in 1821. And we are one of just 6 institutions in the United States that were founded by a congressional charter. So we're very proud of that. But here on the map, we are located in the Foggy Bottom area, which is right around here. This is where most campus buildings are located. You can, of course, see the Washington Monument is there. This is the National Mall where the Congress is at one end. The White House is down around in here as well. So we really are, what we like to think of is that we are where business and policy intersect, because we have government, nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, international organizations, and more private industry in the area as well. So lots of opportunities where we're situated. Just a little bit about some rankings. We were ranked by the Financial Times as having the #1 international business program in the United States for our Master of Science in International Business, #2 worldwide. We are also #1 for the percentage of women in our global MBA program. And we were ranked #2 in the US for our Master of Science in Finance. So you can see we've also received high rankings for diversity in our classes. And we have many other high-ranked programs as well. Okay, so what programs do we offer? We offer 2 full-time MBA formats. Our global MBA, which is a 2-year full-time cohort-based degree. And then we also have the accelerated MBA. This is an MBA that is for people who have generally over 10 years of work experience. It meets on a couple of evenings a week, but both are open to international applicants, and both also have a general track as well as a STEM designated track. So if you're not familiar with STEM designated, once you complete a degree in the United States, you are eligible to work in the US for up to a year after you graduate. However, if you do a degree that is STEM designated, you are eligible to work for up to 3 years. So both do have that track. We have 13 different master's degrees. And our masters that are STEM designated are project management, information systems technology, finance, applied finance, business analytics. Our interdisciplinary business studies and our accountancy program also have a general track and a STEM track. We have a general master's of accountancy, which is not STEM. And then we have a master's of accountancy in accounting analytics. And the accounting analytics track is STEM. So you would want to make sure you apply to the correct one. But we also have various other degrees in everything from human resource management to marketing to tourism. And most of our master's degrees are 30 to 33 credits long, so could be completed in a full calendar year to a year and a half as a full-time student. Our Master of Science in Finance is longer. That's a 48 credit degree. And applied finance is a 36 credit degree, but the rest are 30 to 33 credits. So just a little bit of highlights about GW. We, of course, have world-class faculty. As you might have seen on a previous screen, we were ranked #2 by The Economist for our faculty quality. Our faculty members are frequently published in academic journals, in the news. We have faculty members who frequently do interviews with major news sources in TV and radio. We also have a very innovative curriculum. We place a lot of focus on technology and analytics in our programs, whether that be information systems technology to marketing. So we make sure our students have the most up-to-date skills that are needed in the field. We have a strong international perspective. We are pleased to have many international students on our campus. And we do indeed have students, many students from India, from Ghana, other countries in West Africa. We have a dedicated career center. We have a very extensive and involved alumni network. And we have many student clubs, which you would be welcome to join. Our degrees are also having a high degree of flexibility. So we have over 20 graduate certificates, which are in various topics and which are 12 credits long. So if you do a degree, for example, our Master of Science in Management, has, you have over 12 elective credits that you can do. So if you have a degree that has over 12 elective credits, you can be strategic about choosing your electives and do the electives, the elective classes that will get you the 12 credits you need to get a certificate. So you would graduate not just with a Master of Science in Management, for example, but with that degree plus a graduate certificate in, let's say, business analytics or in marketing. We have a broad range of electives in the School of Business that you can choose from for your degree. It's also possible to bring some credits outside of the School of Business from one of our other schools or colleges with approval of your advisor. We have joint and dual degrees. So for example, a popular choice for our global MBA students is to do a global MBA with a dual degree in a Master of Human Resource Management, for example, or an MS in Information Systems Technology Management. So it is possible to do a dual degree with the MBA and one of our master's degrees. Through our Office of Global and Experiential Education, which serves solely GW School of Business, it's possible to gain credits through doing a short-term study away program, whether that be doing an overseas program for about 10 days with one of our faculty members, or we also have domestic study away programs. So we had a study away program last year looking at Austin, Texas, and the entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem in that city. And for some degrees, it is also possible to do a semester at one of our partner business schools overseas. So a lot of opportunities to make that degree fit exactly what you're interested in, no matter how diverse your interests may be. And I want to point out that we have a wonderful career center here, the Fowler Career Center, and they are only serving GW School of Business students. They have career counselors there who will be happy to meet with you to talk about your resume, crafting that, crafting cover letters, interviewing skills. They maintain a broad range of alumni that they are in contact with, who they can connect you with if someone who is a GW grad is, for example, working in an organization that you're interested in. So this is their mission right here, and they do encourage students to set an appointment with them as soon as possible in their GW academic career so they can get to know you and what you're interested in. And just a sample of some of the organizations where students have landed after graduation, graduates of all of our graduate programs. So I'm sure you can see some of the big four accounting firms are here. Booz Allen is, of course, there, Ernst & Young, JP Morgan Chase. We also have all the government agencies in the DC area. We have many nonprofit organizations. We are located just down the street from the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund. And we are seeing more and more private industry come to the DC area. Amazon has established a large presence here just a couple years ago. Capital One is a huge private employer located in the Washington, DC area as well. Of course, for our graduates who study sport management, we are a big sports city with many sports teams, but really endless possibilities in private and public sector here. And just a sample of where we have alumni groups and alumni networks throughout the world. So no matter where you land after graduation, you can always find an alumni network to tap into for events, networking, job search advice, etc. We have over 53,000 graduates of the GW School of Business, so lots of people all over the world. Okay, so how to actually apply? For an application, you would need to complete our application form and then upload copies of your resume, your transcript, your statement of purpose, and then you would also need to enter the name and email address of someone who can serve as your recommender they will get an automated message from us, email from us, that will instruct them on how to upload a copy of their letter of recommendation, and then that will automatically be attached to your application. So it's a pretty straightforward system. Many students do ask about the statement of purpose. It is generally a page to a page and a half long, and we're looking to see a well-crafted, grammatically correct statement where you share more about yourself and your background, why you're interested in applying to the particular degree, and what you're contemplating doing in the future, and how you think the degree can help to get you there. For international applicants, for English language test scores, we do require TOEFL, IELTS, Pearson Test of English, or Duolingo. The scores that you see on the screen are the optimal scores. So if you have a 90 to a 99 in TOEFL, a 6 or 6.5 in IELTS, or 115 in Duolingo, you can still be admitted. It would just be admission with the condition that you take an English course in your first semester, but we do accept any of those tests. If you have a transcript from an institution outside of the United States, it will need to be evaluated. We accept evaluations from any company that's a member of the National Association of Credential Evaluation Services. So you may have heard of WES, ECE, Spantran, etc. Any of those are fine. And it is okay to go ahead and submit your application before you have your English test score, your transcript evaluation, or your letter of recommendation comes in. And I just want to point your attention to the bottom right corner of the screen. There is an application fee to submit, but you would not need to pay that because you have been joining us today. So that code is a fee waiver code. When you come to the end of your application and you're ready to submit, you would just click Save and Pay, and then you would be able to indicate that you have a fee waiver code, type that in, and then our operations team here at GW will see that you've entered that code, and they will manually get your application submitted without the payment. So to make a note of that. And of course, funding your education, a big question on everyone's minds, I'm sure. Tuition for our master's programs for the 30 to 33 credit MS programs, which most of them are, tuition is going to range anywhere from about $59,000 to $65,000 for the complete program. The $103,000, that is the Master of Science in Finance, which is 48 credits long. And that the MBA, our global MBA, is currently a flat rate of $125,000 for the full program. So those are our full tuition costs for the complete programs. Scholarships are available, and there is nothing special that you need to do to apply for a scholarship. You will automatically be considered when you apply and you submit your application. So at the time, if it's decided that you will be admitted, it will also be decided if you'll be admitted with any funding. In your letter of admission, if you're to be admitted, it will state whether or not you're getting any funding, and it will also state how much. And it's always listed as a percentage. So for example, if you get 20% merit-based scholarship, that means that each semester that you're registered for class, 20% of your tuition will be covered by that scholarship. So that is something you're automatically considered for. We also encourage admitted international students to look at loan options. You might have heard of a couple of companies, Prodigy and Empower. They are definitely familiar with our GWSP programs, and we have students who have secured loans from them. There is also a loan company that specifically works with African students, which is called 8B. And we've also had students in contact with them. We get a lot of questions about assistantships. Assistantships are not something that would be packaged as part of your scholarship. The only funding you would be given at the time of admission would be that merit-based scholarship. Assistantships are posted at the beginning of the semester by any School of Business departments that happen to have openings. And then you would be welcome to apply once you're here. But it's not something that's guaranteed, and it's not something that would be packaged with your admission. We do also have international students who do on-campus jobs. That's certainly open to them as to apply to as well. All right. Well, I think you're certainly at time. So hopefully that's just a good overview to give you some more information about the programs that we offer and get you excited about GW and Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that. There are a few questions that have come in, and Kyle,
Sure.
I'll start with you on this one. While you were speaking, there's a student that's asked about what do you see the role of innovation metrics in the coming years? How are companies going to adapt this and try and use that to stay competitive? Any thoughts on that?
Here's the thing. This is the beauty of it, is that most people think they know what they're talking about with this, and they know what innovation metrics are, or the metrics around it, and they don't. They're just unfamiliar, because the reality is there's not, I wouldn't call these innovation metrics. I would call these like weaknesses, and people being aware of the weaknesses in this is essentially being aware of the weaknesses of the people they're competing against and where they're going to move and where they're going to go. So I don't think there's going to be changes in the metrics. We still have to measure this the same. It's like what I said at the beginning. God knows all the details, and the information we have is missing details. And if you don't acknowledge that when you're doing the analysis, you won't see where people go, and you won't see where you need to be next. And so I believe this will be it's been happening over and over and over again, and it will continue to happen, because people just, you get managers in a position in a business, in a large corporation, and they don't have the fight attitude. They have the flight attitude, and the siren song sounds good. And so you have to be able to approach it differently.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Megan, I'll bring you the next question at this point. There's a question from Shreya who's curious about a good GMAT or GRE score. If she has a low GPA, how does having, one, is there an advantage of taking or scoring well on the GMAT GRE? And what's a good score in your opinion as well?
Sure. So that's good. Glad that question was asked. GMAT GRE is actually not required right now for our programs. It is optional. For the global MBA, it is encouraged to submit a GMAT GRE score. Still optional, but encouraged. But the rest of our programs, it's completely up to you whether or not you want to submit a score. Most of the master's candidates I see have not submitted one. If you have a lower GPA and you want to sort of beef up your application in other ways, yes, we would definitely note that though your GPA might be lower, you do have a really strong GRE or GMAT score. In terms of what would be a good score, I can share in just a second. For GRE, it would be definitely noticeable if you have a score, I would say 320 or higher. For GMAT, if you have a score of 640 or higher, we would definitely note that you have a very, very strong score. Again, not required, but I totally understand if you want to beef up your application with that.
Wonderful. No, that's very helpful. And Megan, one more question here. When is a good time to start the application?
Sure. So we have just started our fall 2023 semester. Students are back on campus. We admit students for spring 2024 and for fall 2024. Not all of our programs admit for spring. The ones that do not admit for spring are business analytics, international business. Our global MBA program does not admit for spring. Those are the main ones. Accounting analytics also does not admit for spring. General accountancy does. Accounting analytics is only fall. If you're interested in a program that starts in spring and that's when you would like to start, I would highly encourage you to get your application in by October 1st, so that there's sufficient time with visas, etc. If you can't get it in by October 1st, that doesn't mean you can't apply for spring, but that's our preferred deadline right now. If you are interested in applying for the fall semester, which will be starting in August of 2024, you do, of course, have a lot of time, but time goes fast. Our first deadline will be November 1st, but I would say you would certainly want to get it in before March. March is when our global education office starts processing documents for I-20s for the fall semester. So if you want to really be on top of that, apply by March.
Fantastic. That's super useful, Megan. And I think, from a point of timing of application, one great thing that you shared earlier was the application fee waiver code. So for any students that are looking to apply for this upcoming spring or the next fall intake, please feel free to use the application fee waiver code. Our team will just be putting that on the chat box now again for your reference as well, and we will circulate that later. We're slightly out of time, so I want to thank both of you. Carl, thank you for being here and for the fantastic masterclass. And Megan, thank you for sharing information about the school as well. For everybody, for all the students, there's still about 225 or more of you here. We're glad that you were able to join, and hopefully this benefited you as well. We would encourage you, if you are looking for scholarships or funding information as well, GW has partnered with Seed to offer some exclusive scholarships. So go on to seedglobaleducation.com where you can learn more about the scholarships as well. But apart from that, wishing you the very best in your journey. Please do reach out to the school or us if you have any further questions as well. And with that, signing off for today. Have a lovely rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.